Last night while I was going through these experiences, some made me laugh, some made me cry. They're so moving, some are so inspiring. They're all inspiring in different ways. But I decided to change the content of today based on it. I think I've got something to share with you today that I think will be so simple and yet profound. And I'm a passionate man about profound knowledge. I'll tell you why. Part of it is I always want to find tools to help people. And my experience is a little different than a lot of other people. When I'm recognized, people don't come up and go, "Oh, thanks a lot," or "I want an autograph or photograph." They want to tell me a story, or they want me to help them solve something right now in this moment. And so I'll tell you a funny story from probably almost 30 years ago. I was doing this seminar in a public hotel, and I went to the restroom to do the necessary. And as I'm standing there, this man, two over me is also standing there, and he's kind of groaning and stuff, and he looks up and he sees me, and he looks again. He goes, oh my God, you're Tony Robbins. Oh my God. He goes, I've been thinking of committing suicide. I think I need your help. And as he does it, he turns full stream and pees all down my leg. And I said, I think I can help you commit that suicide based on what you've done here. So over the years, I look for tools. I'm a big believer. If you want to jot down a simple phrase, complexity is the enemy of execution. Complexity is the enemy of execution. When you make things complex, you don't follow through. So I work super hard to take complex things and get them simpler and simpler and simpler so that people actually use them. And if you're running a business, I know many of you own your own businesses, you got to keep it simple, the plan, the strategy, the tools, so everybody gets it and everybody can execute on it. So I'm always looking for what I call profound knowledge. Profound knowledge is something that's so simple that once you understand it, you can immediately change your life or help somebody else very quickly. And one of the most profound and most simple is changing your story, as we've talked about on the first day, and then we went to a specialized part of it yesterday called identity, right, or branding. Well, change your story, you change your life is absolutely accurate. And you can change your story by bringing different parts of yourself to the story. How many have played a little more with the warrior or the magician? Yes. Or your king or queen? Good. Well, last night I was reading a woman named Cynthia. I think it was Cynthia Roderick is her name. She's down in Mexico. She's 80 years old. And her little story was that her husband of, I don't remember how many decades, he died this last December. And she said they used to go on these walks together at night, and it was such a special time, and she's never walked since that time. And she said, last night my warrior took over, and I went on a 2-mile walk, and I felt so connected to my husband. It was just so beautiful. Give it up for her. She was so Cynthia was part of the trigger for me, too, is if you understand the structure of a story, the story of your life, not just how you can change your story, but where you are in your own story, it can give meaning to things like the loss of a loved one. It can give meaning to the most painful things in life. Because somewhere, some of us have figured out, that we're not supposed to have problems. I tell people the only problem people really have is they think they're not supposed to have any. Problems are the things that wake us up from the mundane, from the day-to-day, and they make us, if we eventually are willing to face them, they make us grow and expand. They grow us spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. Something is always a problem until you go to a higher level of consciousness or awareness or a new belief, or new actions, or you get a new skill. And so the most important thing for us might be to understand where we are in that cycle. And if you study humanity, we have transferred our values always through history, through stories. Before there was any way to record those stories, it was stories that were told. And then written stories, obviously, movies, films, no matter what technology we use, it's stories that we do the transfer for. And if you've done any study, you know that all stories, all mythology, all stories across the world, they have different formats. Almost every story, if you read a religious book like the Bible or Bhagavad Gita or the Quran or any religious text, it's filled with stories. And what do those stories do? They tell us, here's a story of a warning, here's a story of an example. And so the first thing you want to think about yourself is my story right now a warning or an example? And the good news, if it's a warning, you still got time to make it an example. Not an example like everybody has to be that way, but an example of what's possible in the midst of challenge, in the midst of tragedy. Because just like the seasons have a purpose, we could have springtime all the time. It would be so easy, or fall all the time. Why do we have the hot summer in between that? Why do we have the freezing winter where it seems like you might not make it? Because they have a purpose in developing who we are and making us stronger and make us more alive. And so we have the night and then the day. Well, the same thing is true in the story of our lives. And so most stories, the most inspiring stories, are the stories that we remember throughout history in every culture. They're usually stories of going from slavery to freedom. Not necessarily literally that. It could be like the story of Gladiator. Here's this proud general, Roman general in charge, and all of a sudden things change. He's knocked to his knees and he's enslaved, and he becomes a gladiator. And he fights these battles within himself, not only the battles in the outside world, the battles within himself, the battles of external enemies and internal enemies. Those are the toughest ones. And in the end, he wins, he conquers, he helps to make a difference in Rome in his death, and he's unified with his wife and family once again, if you know the story. So these are the stories, but it might be somebody that was imprisoned, enslaved by fear in relationships, and they could never do it, and finally they broke out and they developed this relationship, and their life was never the same again, or happily ever after, as we all call it, right? So those are the stories that move us. And one of the things that's most important to remember about your story is the problems in your life are usually created because you have something you want to have happen, and there's an opponent. And there's three kinds of opponents, if you want to jot them down real quick. There's the external opponent, the obvious person who seems to be getting in the way of what you're doing. It could have been your boss or a coworker or somebody who works for you or a competitor or something of that nature. But then there's also the intimate opponent. That's when somebody really close to you. How many of you in your business have had somebody really close to you in your personal life and they stole money or they took advantage and you felt so hurt by? Who's been through this experience? Make some noise if you've had this experience, ladies and gentlemen. That's a tougher opponent than the external one, right? Because it's close to home. And then there's the internal opponent, the fight within yourself to do what's right, even though you might be rewarded for doing what's wrong in the culture that we live in. Now, the hero story has been the great story of humanity. But today, we have things like TikTok and social media where the attention span of humans got smaller and smaller, and there's not much story. Now the story is I'm a victim. And victimhood is really interesting today because it gives you power. Powerlessness today is power. But it's not something that makes you proud, as we've already talked about. It won't make you strong. It won't make you fulfilled. It'll give you the illusion of power. But you're not empowered. And so, unfortunately, that's where the world starts to get. But humanity, the longest story of all, is that hero's journey. Every culture has it. So if you're familiar with the hero's journey, if you're familiar with Joseph Campbell, who did the study of all these stories across all these cultures, he had a 12-step journey he described. And I want to just give you a tighter version of it, say 7 steps. I'll give you 2 quick examples of it. And then what I want to show you today is kind of like how to get yourself on the path from where you are to where you really want to be and how you're going to get there. So if we look at his idea of the journey, he says the journey always starts with where you are, your ordinary world. So we could use the example of the Wizard of Oz and Dorothy, and she's in this black and white environment, this farm town, and her life is kind of boring and not much is happening. That's where it starts. And then something happens. That's the next step. And that something happens calls you. It calls you to an adventure. In this case, she sees that this tornado's coming and she's trying to get back home. And it's scary all of a sudden. It disrupts this normal day-to-day life. We all have something that disrupts us. And we think it's a problem, but it's actually a call to adventure. And what I want to get you to have today, if you're open to it, is I want you to be able to come up with a new meaning for what's happening in your life. A meaning that empowers you, no matter what's happening in your life, and a meaning that shows you where you are on the path and what to do next if you want your life to really turn into something that you are proud of, that you feel is an example within yourself. The next step, of course, is after she gets this call, she first tries to not go through the call. She tries to duck out, tries to not happen, but guess what? There's a point, even though she refuses, where she's taken. Right? The environment takes us sometimes. It doesn't matter that you don't want it. You can try to refuse it, but ultimately you're going to go on this journey. And sure enough, it does. She's taken, right? The tornado rips her off and takes her to a brand new world, and she wakes up and everything's in color. Do you remember how many remember the story of Wizard of Oz? Who's with me here, ladies and gentlemen? Make some noise if you got it. So everything's in color, and her house lands, and all these people. She meets new people, new experiences. And that's where you go on the next step, where you start to meet your new allies. When you go on a journey, you're going to meet new people that you never met before, new experiences that you're not prepared for, but they'll be beautiful. And you probably usually meet a mentor, someone who can guide you, someone who's been down the path before. If you remember the story, she meets Gilda, the good witch, and she shows her house landed on one of the wicked witches, and she takes those ruby slippers and puts her on them and sends her on the journey. And when you start to go on the journey, there's a point where you've crossed the threshold. That's what they call it. Crossing the threshold means you're at the point of no return. She goes, you got to go you can't get home any other way. You're going to have to meet the great Oz. You're going to have to go on the journey, take the yellow brick road. And you don't know what's going to be on that journey. There are going to be scary things and exciting things. But as you go on the journey, you're going to meet more allies. And you're going to meet more challenges, more opponents. And then along the journey, we always go to the sixth step, which is the ordeal. The ordeal is the battle. That's what transforms us. The battle with external enemies, the battle sometimes with people we thought were allies, the battle within ourselves to overcome our own fears and limitations and resentments or angers or hurts or wanting to feel sorry for ourselves, whatever that battle is. And we transform when we finally push through and battle enough times so there's a transformation. And that transformation comes in the final and seventh step. And in that step, what happens is you have what's called the return or the elixir. And what happens? She makes it through. She fights the battles. The dark witch comes. She spills water on her, if you remember, and she dissolves. And then the monkeys that were attacking her all help her, and they take her to the beautiful city of Oz where she's going to meet this all-powerful wizard. And she goes behind the curtain and finds he's a little man, and he's totally ordinary. And he doesn't have any magical powers. But he reminds her that the magical powers everyone's seeking when they come to him are already in them. The scarecrow wants a brain, but he already has one. He's got wisdom. The lion didn't think he had courage, but by going on the journey, he found his courage. The Tin Man, finds this new level of strength. And for her, she forgets, she thought her world was so limited, and she discovers that the answers are inside. All she has to do is click her heels and repeat what? Do you guys remember? Put it in the chat box. What did she say? There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. And she returns the hero of her own story. And she wakes up, and all the people that are there that are part of her life, but she sees them different because she sees parts of them were in the people in her dream. The man who's like Scarecrow is one of her uncles, the courageous lion. And she describes to them, and there's a level of joy and happiness and alignment. And when you go on the journey and you fight the battles and you slay your dragons, the beautiful thing is you become more. That's why we have these challenges. So I get emotional watching some of your pieces last night because I want to just reach out and hug some of you people out there because I know you're in the middle of the journey, you're in the middle of the battle, and I'm trying to be a good mentor to you. I'm not the only one. There's so many good ones out there for you. But I want you to know that there is light at the end of that tunnel, but you've got to keep going. What do they say about when you're going through hell? Keep going. That's the only solution. Who's with me on it? Make